Well, welcome Boise Startup Week to another session. I'm very excited today to be joined by Cradlepoint CMO, Todd Krautkremer. Now, Todd and I go a little ways back, and I want to tell this story because 3 years ago during Startup Week, I had the gall to just email George Mulhern and said, hey, we really got to get Cradlepoint involved in Boise Startup Week. And of course, he was very excited and said, why don't you meet with our CMO, Mr. Todd? So Todd was nice enough to invite me out for a glass of wine. And I had just a wonderful conversation with Todd about startups and marketing and how to think about building ecosystems. And I have to say, that conversation stayed with me, and I appreciated you taking the time so much to sit down with us today, and also for that glass of wine 2-3 years ago. So thank you, Todd, for joining us.
Well, thanks, Nick. And truth be told, it probably was a couple glasses of wine. And I'm so glad you reached out to George, because we now at Cradlepoint are really committed to being part of Boise Startup Week. We just believe in the Boise tech community and what it can be. And hopefully, I'm sure we'll talk about the elephant on the table, which is the acquisition of Cradlepoint. But it really represents where startups can go in Boise. And it's playing in the big leagues. So very happy we had that meeting 3 years ago now, and we always want to be part of this.
Well, thank you. And that is a little bit of the elephant on the room. So I have to start this conversation. We all saw here in Boise, and of course, anyone paying attention regionally or nationally, the press release that Erickson put out with its intention to purchase Cradlepoint for $1.1 billion. So, from all of us here in Boise, we're very excited about this, and especially the Boise Startup Week team. And of course, it might be a little bit premature at this point, since this is still in the works. But congratulations for the hard work that you and George and really the rest of the Cradlepoint team have been doing. We're all very proud and excited for that.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And you're right. It's as these processes work, it's the intent to purchase. We hope to close it here in the next 30 days. And once we do, of course, we'll be communicating our plans going forward. But people can, I think, connect the dots. We aspire to be the world leader in wireless WAN, and 5G is the catalyst to making that happen. And Erickson is the preeminent provider of 5G infrastructure to carriers around the world. Truth be known, we have 5G in Boise, right across the street from the Boise Plaza. There's a reason for that, it's close proximity to Cradlepoint, but nonetheless, that's a star we can all put.
I was going to say that. I doubt that was accidental.
Yes. Yeah. So I look forward to talking more about it once we close the deal here in the next 30 days. But the thing to remember, and I've done 4 startups myself. I'm a startup guy. This is the biggest venture I've been a part of. And I got into Cradlepoint back in December 2015 through the acquisition of my company, Bertino, which was a leader in cloud networking and software-defined networking. So I understand where a lot of our audience lives today, kind of in that early stage, building company, product market fit. How do I get my first dollar? And what motivates us as entrepreneurs is the vision that what we're doing can ultimately change the world in some big or small way. And when you see an exit from a company like Cradlepoint, who was in those very shoes not that long ago, and the $1.1 billion valuation that was placed on us, and I can tell you that's a very, very rich multiple, however you measure it.
Oh, yeah.
It gives a lot of promise and motivation to early entrepreneurs out there. So we're happy to kind of show where this all can lead to, because we were in those shoes not that long ago.
Well, and many of us here, remember Mark and Highway 12 kind of being a part of those first, rounds of Cradlepoint. And obviously Cradlepoint pivoted very hard in its product offering in those early days. And a lot of us here in town remember those very, very, very early days of Cradlepoint. So you're right. That gives fuel to the fire of kind of ecosystems being built. And especially because you have many employees who are now going to, think about starting their own thing or becoming an angel investor or whatever it is that they might go on and doing. So, that's again why we're also excited about the news that, Erickson published in a press release a few weeks ago, and can't wait to get to the point where we can have you back and talk about the acquisition a lot more.
I look forward to it.
So, kind of jumping right in here, obviously, as the CMO, there's some very specific expertise that you have that we want to try and extract as best as we can today while we talk to you. And, maybe there was two elephants in the room during this conversation. One being the news that came out 2 weeks ago. But the other one is that, all of us have been living through, kind of a once in a lifetime global pandemic. And, really every business right now is trying to understand how to play in a marketplace where things are shifting and changing so fast that, it's almost hard to have a strategy, really. And so I wanted to ask, how did Cradlepoint think about this? What strategy did you employ? And really, what direction did Cradlepoint go to kind of pivot your marketing, especially and really think early days, March, April, May, as you go through that?
No, thanks, Nick. This is a topic very near and dear to my heart. And by the way, during the background of all this pandemic was this amazing transaction going on. So even the way we did this transaction was different than a lot of entrepreneurs that might have done it in the past. But that's another day, another story. The first thing you have to recognize is that the gap between what happens in our consumer lives and happens in our personal lives and what happens in business is ever shrinking and becoming more connected. And all of us have been affected in very material ways around the pandemic. So it's very reasonable to extend that to how our customers buy and how our customers are reacting. Their lives are very similar. They're going through the same personal experiences, and that's being extended to business. So the answer, first of all, is that if I'm an entrepreneur, I better be changing my strategy based on this pandemic. It's not optional because it's changing my life personally. So how do you do that? How did we do that? We really sat down very, very quickly. And this is the beauty. This is the thing that startups have that established companies don't, is agility. And you have to play that card. So we sat down very quickly and we said, okay, let's think about this. Let's break this into 3 phases. There's the emergency phase, the emergency response phase, where it's all about practical and tactical. That was back in the March timeframe, the April timeframe, where the whole world was going through this at the same time. Phase 2 is when you kind of get past that practical, tactical, and now you're forced to think about, what do I do next? And that's exactly that, is how do I get back to business? For restaurants, it was different than healthcare, it was different financial services. Some had boom, some had bust, but all of them were trying to figure out, how do I get back to business? And then there's the third phase, and I call that the new normal. There's not probably a one of us on this cast today that thinks that our life, once normalcy starts to enter in, will be ever as normal as it was before. It's going to be changed. It's going to be a new normal. Same thing's true for business. And to the advantage of a lot of our startups out there, the one thing that we're seeing when people get back to the new normal is they're not forgetting what the pandemic taught them about agility, about the ability to pivot, about the ability to change your business model quickly to respond to whatever happens and comes their way. So today we're going to talk more about this first phase, I expect, but I'm happy to talk about all 3 because we're kind of going through them as we speak. But let's spend a moment to talk about this first phase and what Cradlepoint went through. And hopefully in that story, there's something here for all entrepreneurs. So the first thing we did is we got back to practical and tactical because that's where our customers were living. So let me tell you some very specific examples of what we did. We changed our messaging. Our messaging, because Cradlepoint is larger than many of the companies here, our messaging was kind of more aspirational, talking about where we can take them. And while our corporate messaging, you don't change, our solutioning messaging, our webinar messaging, our communication to customers and partners changed immediately. And it was hyper practical and tactical. And it was saying, restaurants, we see, here's the challenge you're facing. We know because we try to go out and eat, we order on DoorDash and other things. Here is how our solution can help solve this immediate problem in hand, which is an emergency response. Maybe healthcare is a better example because we can relate to that. Remember when tents were being set up in Javits in Central Park and Javits Center was being converted and the port in Oakland was offloading people from cruise ships? Cradlepoint was there in every one of those situations because our value prop was You can buy our solution today. And let me just segue for a minute here. It's not just messaging, it's business model. So for us, we would typically send a router out to somebody. We always could ship it overnight. That's great. But then they would have to go work for their carrier, get a SIM, just like we do in our phone, plug the SIM in, and it's only till you get a SIM, you get a network. We started to ship the product from the factory in 24 hours or less with a SIM in it. And while it was in flight, we activated it through our carrier partners. So when it hit the ground, that doctor, not an IT person, probably that doctor in the tent, simply plugs it in the wall. It comes up and operational. How do we help that? We created videos. We created videos for the doctor, video for the IT person, said, here's what you do, step 1, 2, and 3. We're not going to let you figure it out. We're going to help you. We're going to be prescriptive. This was all part of that communication. And we told the customer, this is what we're going to do for you. It'll ship and it'll be ready when it hits the ground to turn up a network. We're going to show you how to turn up a network. The doctor, the IT person. The IT person, we're going to show you how to keep it running so that it never goes down during this crisis. That's what I mean by practical and tactical. And it's a change because a lot of times you position to aspirations and sell to need. We were positioning to need and selling to need. And we're going overboard on being prescriptive because that's what the moment demanded.
So much about it too is, really kind of by being able to change your own internal processes back to being nimble. I have to imagine that the last thing any of these doctors want to be dealing with is trying to figure out how to set up a router when they actually need to be doing 1,200, 100%. COVID tests or whatever it was. Right. And so by removing that friction, I have to assume that you also saw that the orders for these things increased, that more and more of these tents were looking to Cradlepoint as a solution because of the easiness that you're doing. And so did you notice a kind of a snowballing effect in the demand for that particular service?
Yeah, we did.
You took those steps? Yeah.
It was customers, it was partners. Think of New York as an example. I use that because all of us understand what happened in New York. It was so advertised and the tragedy there. But it's a small community. All the doctors are communicating. The governor was communicating. So the first responders were all there, which is a community of ours as well. So they're all saying, this is what works, this doesn't, let's adjust right away. But partners as well figured it out real quick. What did they need to do to help their customers, and who could be the company that provides for them what was needed, because they too had to change their business and respond. So it all connected. Let me give you evidence of how that played out. We all started our calendar year and our fiscal year the same. So January 1st, we had a new plan. COVID didn't exist. We had this great growth strategy of 30+%, and then came COVID. And we had a choice. Do we have COVID as an excuse not to achieve our plan, or do we find a new way to do it? And as you could hear, we changed up everything. But the evidence was we had an amazing Q2. We were 98% of the original plan, but it came in a way very different than we imagined.
Yeah.
So it works. Those that are nimble and that can really get practical and tactical and solve bleeding from the neck needs that customers have, it works. Customers respond to that, and they're thankful that they're able to pursue their mission with your help.
Yeah. That's one of the amazing stories that I've kind of heard over the last few months, especially, in talking with you in previous conversations about how successful that pivot really was. And maybe, I know we kind of focus a little bit here on kind of the early days and the choices that were being made right there, but maybe we can skip ahead and talk about the new normal for a minute and how you think about what the new normal is. I think those of us who were nimble and did pivot and did change how we acquired customers and changed our marketing, that's kind of where some of us are right now too. And so how should we be thinking about what the future holds? How should we be thinking about what the new normal might be?
Yeah, I enjoy talking about that a lot. And you're right, we're really kind of in that third phase now. But let me just give one example to the audience of phase two. Phase two was that when the emergency response was in place and people were kind of dealing with the problem at hand, they were starting to think about, well, how do I start resuming some bit of my business? How do I get something going again? Because the livelihood of those businesses really depend on it. And I'll take restaurants, another major customer of ours. We all know what was happening. They moved to outside dining. If you were a consumer packaged goods, like a customer of ours that, the name, Pandora, right? That builds custom jewelry. Your problem is still people couldn't come into malls to get it. So you were landlocked. So what they did is they moved their part of their business outside to the curb. Now, if you're a provider of infrastructure, applications, networks, whatever you provide, computing, all of us tech people are somewhere in that continuum. You got to think about what that means, right? They didn't build a network to stretch out to the curb. And Cradlepoint could, because we can be a network you can take anywhere you are, there's a cellular connection. So we again started to change up our game. But what was consistent, it wasn't the urgency of the emergency response, but it was the let us help you get back to blending the crisis that you're dealing with the changes to your business. And here's how. We still were very specific in our use cases. Talked more futuristic about how we could help you get from here back to something that looks like normal, but still very focused on the use cases. Now that we're in this new normal, our messaging is around, let's remember what we all learned. The importance of agility was the difference between life and death in a very real level for those that we're serving on the healthcare and the first responder front lines, to businesses that are trying to hang on. So the way we think about what we're about to do for the future of the company has to be informed by what we went through. And let me help share with you what agility can mean and the infrastructure of yours that needs to be made more agile so you can respond to these types of events in the future, which, by the way, hurricanes, floods, they don't have to be in the form of a pandemic.
Yeah.
They can be regional, they can affect all over the world. All of them have kind of the same localized impact. So it gave us an opportunity to talk about our solution in a new and more relevant way because, like us as all humans, we're all forever changed having gone through this experience together.
Oh, yeah.
So it all ties to rethinking your messaging, tailoring it to different communities to make it relevant. What I tell healthcare, even in this new normal, is different than what I tell retailers or financial services organizations. So you need to be more tailored. And you need to blend relevancy, which is still very much in vogue, with the promise of where you can take them. Get back to that positioned aspiration, but sell to need philosophy that I live by.
Well, it's so interesting because when we talk to really early stage startups, a lot of times we're talking about kind of your like customer acquisition beachheads, maybe some of those first identifiable customers that you can build your sales and marketing pipelines around and get like very specific on their needs. A company that's Cradlepoint size, it sounds like you went through the same exercise, but you did it for every vertical that you needed to play.
That's correct. Right? The scope was different, but the process was very similar. And I'll share with many of our listeners today, because I've been in a startup 4 times, right? Much of the technology we're building, the reason we're building it, what motivates us and why it's so compelling is it kind of changes the slope of our customers' business. That's not a one and done. That's not an event. That's a process. So we need to think about our customers are making a relationship with us for the next 5 years. It's not for the next 5 months. It's for the next 5 years. So what we have to do is we have to help them understand how where they're going the next 5 years is evolving because of this experience, how we can get them there. But then we have to bring it back to let's start right now solving this problem in a very tangible way. Because people can buy into the vision, the strategy, the aspirational state, and they go, that's great. And when I start to feel that, I'm going to remember I had this conversation. It doesn't help us getting that $1 in the door. We want to say, I want to take you to where you're going, and let's all agree it's a different place. And here's why I can take you there better because of the agility, because of what I bring to the table. But by the way, here's a problem we can solve for you right now today. And it's only when you blend those two pieces do you really become more compelling. And let me tell you, the scrutiny now of buyers right now, they're not thinking about all the different things they were buying before. Their budgets have changed. Their business have changed. They're getting to that very practical state of, I have to think about the future and where you can take me, but it has to be relevant today. So you got to combine the two in a very compelling way. And I'll tell you how far we took this, Nick. We just launched a new website in the middle of all this chaos. It was actually back in May. And we've got many buyer communities, but if I were to break them into two, it was first responders, anybody that can qualify for a special cellular connection that gives them priority and preemption. And then we had the rest of the world that acted and thought and bought a lot from the IT buying center. So we took our website, and folks can go check that out now, and we created a dual persona website where when you land on it, within 10 seconds, this little interrupter pops up and says, hey, to better communicate with you, just tell us, are you interested in public safety solutions, or are you interested in kind of other enterprise? And when you click public safety, the whole persona of the website changed. We talked to you as an individual and the problems that you have. We didn't talk in technology terms. We talked in personal terms. We talked to the buyer. A lot of time, chief of police, the fire captain doesn't understand a lot about technology, but totally understands the problems they're trying to solve with technology. And we changed the whole site, the whole experience. Back to the other side, it's more of, hey, I'm talking to you, IT person that has to ultimately buy and support the solution. Let me tell you what you need to know. So that's the level of specificity to these different personas that we went through here at Cradlepoint. And I will argue, while that sounds like a big company thing, everybody can do that in ways that are large and very small, but meaningful to customers.
As you're saying that, I mean, again, back to things that we try and hound and teach on startups constantly. You know, a big one is understanding who your customer is, being able to build customer personas, customer profiles, and speaking directly to who that is. What you're talking about is no different than the exact messaging that we could talk about to a pre-revenue startup, is really understand who your customer is and what you need to tell them to get them interested in what you're doing. What messaging is going to resonate with them? What products are going to resonate? Because many of these startups might even be still developing their product, which is an interesting phase you could be in, where you can make those adjustments now in the development of your product.
Well, what you touched on is really important. And as a developer, you can relate to this. Now, in the modern world of agile development, it's very much tied around personas right from the start when you're building the product. And unfortunately, a lot of times when that great product built around a persona, the value prop is getting very engineered towards a particular outcome, we lose a little bit of that as we get into marketing. And it's a shame because the product is built that way. And as always, I believe, you know, bad things are bad and have universal badness, but there's also good things that come out of it. And as marketeers, whether you're in a company the size of Cradlepoint or in a startup, there's much more synergy between them because it's getting back to the basics of understanding who your buyer is, what they care about, different care abouts today than they did back in January, but they still have care abouts, and making sure you nail that. And then helping them understand where they can go with you and why you're not a flash in the pan, but you are going to be part of their lives going forward. That's table stakes. It always has been, but we're now back to the basics.
Yeah. And maybe for an early stage company, I mean, Cradlepoint probably had a lot of data to draw from, at least to understand how to maybe change up how you're messaging or who you were targeting in that moment. But how should a startup think about building those profiles, building those personas? How should they think about knowing who their first customer is? Since, you know, that is the table stakes.
You know, having been in their shoes, and I still today mentor a lot of startups back in Minnesota, where I'm from. And one of the challenges I see in our zest to change the world, when we get out of those starting gates, we go, here's all the things that we could do. There's 10 different customers segments we can go after. And the most important thing is ruthless convergence down to one, maybe two. And when you move that from 10 to 1 or 2, the level of detail and specificity you get into automatically starts to flow. And that's the right thing. Because if you can't identify one community that could really benefit from your solution, why do you think there's 10 out there that could? So find the one that you think is the best use case and get ruthless in dissecting who are the buyers, what are their care abouts, what's the state of their business today, not how I knew it 3 months, 6 months ago, right now, today, and really position your product so that out of all the things that they are considering, now very few that they'll actually fund, you make the cut line and you're one of them that they fund. I mean, that is the mission right now of startups, and it can be done. In fact, I'll argue startups are in a better position to do it because they don't have the legacy something like Cradlepoint that has all these success stories in the past, and now you got to wade through them and figure out, of all the success stories, which ones right now do I really need to focus on that will make the difference between meeting our plan or failing miserably?
Oh, and what's so interesting about your story with Cradlepoint is usually companies who get to your guys' size, this is where they fall down, right? Typically, larger companies are too slow to make these pivots, where startups, you're correct, have the opportunity to not have the baggage, to not have, Joe VP of whoever who like doing it the old way, pocket veto the plan. You don't have that same amount of stuff to wade through. But it also goes back to the commendable story here of what Cradlepoint was able to accomplish in responding to what's going on right now. So with that, Todd, we're kind of at time. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I'm not kidding. I actually sat here and just started kind of like taking notes on some of the stuff you're saying. So, even I am sitting here learning from everything and the wisdom that you bring to this conversation. Again, congratulations to Cradlepoint. I know you guys are still working through that deal, but we all saw the news a couple weeks ago, so we're very excited here in Boise for that news. And again, thank you from the Boise Startup Week community for taking the time to talk with us.
Well, thanks, Nick. It's a great thing that you do. The startup community is very important, and I'll say that while we're acquired by this global leader, Erickson, they are very committed to the Boise community. We're not going anywhere. We're growing our business here, and we'll continue to be very active in this exciting startup community.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, and we'll have to leave it there.
Thank you.